It is October 13th, 2015. What I'm about to play on my old CD player, audio cassette player, and radio is an audio cassette recording made of an interview that was done with me live in the studio of KOPN-FM, the NPR affiliate in Columbia, Missouri, from mid-Missouri. The host was Carol Greenspan. The program was called Jewish Spectrum. I was in Columbia on what was then a third annual teaching trip to the University of Missouri, Stevens College, and various Columbia public schools, high school, and elementary schools. So since we don't have a visual to go with the, I'm just going to hold the iPod camera here against a couple of unframed works from the Under the Wings series, Holocaust art series, which was then called Under the Wings of God. I've since shortened the title. So without further ado, here we go.
Better late than never. I have a treat for you. A.K.Segan, who dislikes getting up early in the morning probably as much as I do, has just arrived. Akiva has been for the last several years coming to Columbia from Seattle, Washington, to present his view of the Holocaust in art. And as he walked into the room, he handed me a remarkable drawing called Under the Wings of God, Foundation for Holocaust Education Through Art, of people with wings. And that was serendipity, because I saved that song about the butterfly, Akiva, until for you. I thought that you would arrive just about the time it was playing. Does that relate to your view of these people with wings?
Well, interestingly enough, one of the drawings in the series actually depicts a boy in the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland from a photograph, and I drew butterfly wings on him.
This one.
And so there certainly is a relationship of some sort there. Most of the drawings portray victims of racism, hate by the Nazis with bird wings. And there's several where I haven't drawn either bird or butterfly wings. I've drawn wings from my imagination. Of course, what an artist can draw from direct observation can be surpassed probably thousands or millions of times by what an artist can draw from his or her imagination. But often a slight tangent here, all the wings themselves, I'm drawing either from direct observation of real bird wings or butterfly wings, or from my imagination. The people depicted were all real human victims who suffered because of who they were.
Why wings? Why bird wings?
Well, we have a natural, as human beings, we have a natural preoccupation with flight, and I'm sure that the whole history of humanity, or even in prehistory, worldwide, whatever continent or wherever humans were living, people have had a fascination with flight. Of course, it's only in the last 100 or so years that flight became a reality, but it's not our own flight, as if we were growing wings ourselves, like in the Icarus mythology fable.
How does this relate to the Holocaust?
Well, how it relates to the Holocaust is that, well, when I first began the series in '91, I did a drawing of a trolley car that was in the Warsaw Ghetto that had 3 people in the trolley car visible in the photograph. After I did the drawing of the trolley itself, I decided to add wings to it. So again, back to your question, why wings? Well, wings can be a metaphor for several different things. And I wanted to, well, the first thing that came to mind was that these people had gone up in smoke, and I mean literally. The people that were in the photograph, taken probably in 1941, were, sent to the gas chambers, where they were literally went up into smoke afterwards. If not, they probably had been shot or died of starvation in the ghetto. The ghetto was itself a concentration camp because 100,000 people died in the ghetto even before they began the mass deportations to the Treblinka, where most of Warsaw's Jews died.
It's rather incredible to me to think that we could take 6 million people who had been integrated into the societies in which they lived and have the world, their neighbors, everyone say it's perfectly all right to move them out of here into these neighborhoods where they can't leave.
Not entirely, though. They're...
Yeah, okay, I'm overgeneralizing. There were righteous Jews, and righteous Gentiles, I'm sorry. Forgive me for that terrible mistake. And probably righteous Muslims, and righteous Buddhists, but mainly righteous Gentiles, of course, in Europe. It's amazing that the Red Cross would sanction Theresienstadt. We built these people a city. Of course, they can't leave. This barbed wire will kill them if they try to leave. But they have music here. I played a song about Theresienstadt at the beginning of the show. And I have this vision of trying, well, I volunteered in the prison, I have this vision of putting wings on and flying over the gates.
That's a perfect metaphor. I mean, in the wings drawings, it's offering people a bit of respite from the horror, in a sense, and another reason for the wings and the depiction of these murdered Jews as I've drawn them is restoration of dignity. The Nazis in their zealousness and ethnic cleansing, as it was called in Yugoslavia a few years ago when they were murdering men by the hundreds, if not thousands, in concentration camps in Serbia and such, was included a degradation, stripping, really brutal stripping of the dignity of the people that they viewed as like racially inferior. So I chose to do something which would posthumously, well after their deaths, we're talking over 55 or so years now, restore dignity to them, at least for today's contemporary viewers, especially children. And not everyone might be familiar with what Theresienstadt was. It was a model so-called concentration camp set up by the Nazis in Czechoslovakia, where everything was a ruse, both for the Jews who were incarcerated there, because most of them ended up being shipped to Auschwitz anyway later on, as well as for the International Red Cross, who were sent in there to view what supposedly was like a model work camp for Jewish prisoners. And it was everything again was set up in this ruse, superficial sense to a deception for the Red Cross, who unfortunately didn't have the wherewithal to really see what was going on.
Well, people knew what was going on. They just, Roosevelt knew, Churchill knew. In fact, they refused to bomb the railroad tracks. You could have saved the Hungarian Jews had they bombed the railroad tracks to the concentration camps, because they were killing them at 50,000 a week in Auschwitz alone, and had they bombed the railroad tracks, they could not have transported.
It's an interesting point. Hungarian survivors, and Elie Wiesel is among them. He grew up in a village in what was sometimes Hungary, sometimes Romania. He and his family were deported out of this town late in the war, 1944 or thereabouts, and parts of Western Europe had already been liberated, while the Jews in Hungary, they were the last of the big deportation.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier in the show.
They were still being rounded up and put on the cattle cars and going to their fate, which was death. Wow.
Let's move back,
Sure.
Akiva, to things that are special to you, because this is the ground that I covered right before you got here, and because I figured we'd be covering it when you got here. And you told me that you went to Europe and had a very, very bizarre impression of Poland.
Well, I don't know if I necessarily call it bizarre.
To me, it's bizarre. Yeah.
It's different than what we're used to here in kind of more or less safe and sound America. We don't have the history of war in this country on our soil, aside from the Civil War, the same way that World War II and even World War I permeates the soil of much of Europe. And the consciousness, even in Britain, which didn't have a land invasion by the Germans, the consciousness, especially among the older generation, is much more, there's a much greater awareness on a daily basis of World War II. I mean, just to go into the average pharmacy drugstore, you'll see these paperback book stands with all these books about World War II. And in this country, if you go into a bookstore and they're viewed as eccentrics, and men who may go over to that section and view and you start looking at the books on combat fighting and such, or the video section in a video store like that. But in Poland, the consciousness of the war is 10 to 100 times greater than it would be in Britain. There are memorials all over the country, places where Poles, non-Jewish Poles, lost their lives to the Nazis are marked daily with the places with flowers. So you can walk around any village or city and see flowers placed on walls and such to mark where people have been executed. Indeed, I spent several weeks in a dormitory for art students and music conservatory students in Krakow, in southern Poland. Krakow, as many of you know, of course, was the site of where Schindler's List was filmed, much of the movie. But in this the dormitory I lived in, I didn't tell my folks about this for many years. I had been a Gestapo torture center, and I'm sure that the blood had flowed through the floors and halls of this building. And every day there were new flowers placed outside in the front of the building next to the doorway entrance. Not ironically, I suppose, after the war, when the communists...
Who were the flowers for?
They were in memory of Poles who had been murdered there by the Nazis. The building later was used as a communist government police center, torture center, an equivalent sort of thing. I guess, why waste a piece of architecture that has been used by the Gestapo when the communists are running the country? They can put it to, I guess, effective use.
What about the Jews? You said something to me that one liner that seared my consciousness. Poland. I wrote it down. Let me quote you back.
Sure.
Poland is a Jewish cemetery.
Right. I think of Poland as one vast Jewish cemetery. The country had somewhere around 3.5 million Jews before the war, like let's say 1939, at the time of the Nazi occupation. And at the end of World War II, I think there were 500,000 Jews alive at the end of the war. So, talking about several million Jews in Poland alone who were murdered. And you have to remember, of course, the Jews were transported to the death camps of Poland from all over occupied Europe, plus countries that were allied with Germany. And I mean, you can't walk through Poland without seeing vestiges of Jewish life. I mean, if you're in the country and you see old stone houses that would have survived as opposed to old wooden houses, you can only surmise that some of these houses had once been occupied, lived in by generations of Jewish families. There are synagogues, Jewish community centers, Jewish buildings in towns and villages all over Poland that are used for anything but anything Jewish, because there's no Jews, or if there are Jews, there may be a handful, or one even. In 1985, there was one, the Auschwitz, the death camp, which is the most world-famous camp for the murder of Jews, is adjacent to an actual town of Auschwitz, which is Oswiecim in Polish. And when I was there in 1985, there was a Jewish man who had been born and raised in the town of Oswiecim, who was being visited by families, by his another survivor from his family, and he he stayed in Poland after the war. That was where he was born and raised, and that's where he wanted to be. Most Jews who survived the war, if they didn't immediately leave after Poland was liberated from the hands of the Nazis, left Poland shortly thereafter for America, Canada, Western countries, for Palestine. It was pre-Israel. And then there were waves of, there were, even without Nazis running the show, there were different outbreaks of pretty severe anti-Semitism, even killings of Jews in the post-war years in Poland. And of those several 100,000 Jews that I mentioned that survived, that were alive at the end of the war, most of those emigrated by 1968 or so.
I was struck by the stories of the people who were liberated from the concentration camps, who tried to go back to their homes in Eastern Europe, different parts of Eastern Europe, and found pictures in the city hall of Jews being massacred as if this were a joyous thing, and pictures of Jews being rounded up and their property appropriated, and it was very clear they could not go home. And that's how they landed in a second, but not quite, a little, somewhat rather more benign concentration camp called DP camps, deposed persons camps after the war, where they languished and were swimming from ships to get to Israel. Because the Western countries were quite markedly closed to refugees, unless they were people who wanted, like Schweitzer or Albert Einstein or the entire biochemistry department practically at Columbia University.
Actually, most of those people got out in the late 30s. You're right, tens of thousands of concentration camp survivors languished sometimes for several years or longer in these displaced person camps, which were in effect concentration camps, albeit they were benign because people weren't being starved, brutally beaten, and so on. But they were prisoners, and they were angry. And the British, of course, the policy was to severely restrict the number of Jews who would be admitted into Palestine and such. The most famous outbreak of anti-Semitism after the war was in I believe it's in Kielce in Poland, where I forget how many, it might have been, I forget, somewhere between 20 and 70, but it's 20 and 70 too many. Jews were murdered just like a pogrom, like in the old days, you know, of Tsarist. The term was most commonly used in Tsarist Russia, where there would be these outbreaks of terror, rape and murder against Jews in villages in Russia. Most popularly known in Americans' minds through the movie Fiddler on the Roof, where a pogrom takes place in the course of this musical dramatization of life in the Jewish village.
My grandmother says that her mother had a secret basement where her mother's mother and so on, where they hid the women when the Cossacks came through to prevent rape. And every time I look at the texture of my hair, which is very Eastern European, and now knowing that Jews who married out of the Jewish culture in that era were thrown out, people sat shiva for them, they sat for them in mourning for the dead, it's very clear that there was a lot of rape in my family. And but let's go to some music, and then we'll come back to a little bit more hopeful story. I picked this for you. Under die Polnische Grynica Beinrek. Under the little green Polish trees growing, no more play little Moshulek, Shonalek, no more play, lots of other children, not on the gentle grass, not when it's snowing. Dear little children with eyes so large and staring black, with the dark devastation unfolding, eyes full of fear, full of terror conveying, despair, disaster beyond all comparing. No more play, not on the gentle grass, not when it's snowing.
When was the song? Was the song written after the war in memory of?
This song was written by Joseph Papanikov. He was born in 1899, settled in Israel in 1924, and you're right, the song was written after the war.
Is it sung in Yiddish or?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, Yiddish is the language of East European Jewry.
And it's being sung here on an album put out by American Society for Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum, sung by Paul Zinn.
Unter die Päulische grünige Bäumelech spielen sich mehr nicht kein Meuschelech Schleumelech spielen sich mehr nicht kein Sorrelech Leelech nicht auf kein Gräselech, nicht auf kein Schneelech. Silchen schon mehr nicht die jüdische Stimmelech, von die Kunde Simmelech, Mottelech,
What was different about the Holocaust of Jews and the ethnic cleansing that you referred to in Yugoslavia and that I usually refer to in Nigeria when they tried to kill over 1 million of the Igbos?
Well, the Holocaust was unprecedented as an operation of mass murder, which was designed to completely annihilate a given population of people based on their religion, or some would say their race. And there was no attempt in not to under-represent the tragedy of what the atrocities were going on in Yugoslavia. And there's a new civil war erupting right now as we speak in Kosovo, in southern Yugoslavia. But, and the same thing, in the Nigerian situation, or even in Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge killing fields, in Rwanda and so on, recently, where 500,000 people were slaughtered in the last year or two. The people who were doing the killings weren't trying to wipe out the populations entirely, but they certainly were effectively massacring vast numbers of people. And not only was the mass murder of the Jews unprecedented in scale, again, it sought they were seeking to extinguish every Jewish life throughout Europe. And had the Nazis won the war, they would have, I'm sure they would have gone on everywhere, North America, wherever Jews were living. They were going to eliminate every single person. But not only was the scale of it frightening, the methods of operation to send people in train cars across the whole continent of Europe, from every village, town, every farm, trains crisscrossing every city, village, and so on, packed with human lives that, on arrival, most of them would be put into these centers, these buildings where they were going to be gassed to death. It's beyond the ability of me, along with most people who didn't experience it, to grasp the volume of such a. Can you imagine taking, I don't know, thousands and thousands of Colombias? Population is what here, probably 80,000 people, and training everybody in Colombia into a death camp where everyone's going to be murdered within hours of their arrival, and they're going to have.
So it's the technological thing and the very less organized idea. I'm rushing you, Kiva, because we have so little time left. Because you are 35 minutes late, and so we don't have much time. And you just have about 2 minutes to tell us the other major point that was so important to you.
I'm hoping that I'm just turning it over here, and we'll see if it continues on the other side in a second here, so hang on, folks. Okay. Talk about how technology changes. It still astonishes me when I think about Hungarian Jews being deported to Auschwitz in 1944, had no idea what had befallen Jews from all across Europe in 1941, 42, 43, and there was no leading isolated lives in villages, towns, and even cities like Budapest. The technological change of that compared to what goes on now, I remember being struck. I've been in Israel 7 times on teaching trips since 1999, and I was there twice, within days of war beginning. Once the summer war with Lebanon, and once with one of the Gaza wars, Israeli-Gazan wars, and I think it was during the Israeli-Lebanese war. I think this may have been 2000. I forget, 2005 or 2006. News reports, kids, teens, were I don't know if they were doing texting or whatever the equivalent was, but to friends, people in different countries, about incoming missiles and rockets and so on landing in northern Israel and southern Lebanon from either sides of the border. Something that just diametrically different, like day and night, compared to Hungarian Jews being rounded up in 1944 when so much of European Jewry had already been murdered en masse, as well as millions of other victims of the Nazis and fascists. Anyway, I'm going to flip this over and see if this continues for the last 3 minutes of the interview. Oops. And if not, I shall conclude with a au revoir. Well, lost the last 3 minutes or so, but we got a great bulk of it, and thank you to whoever has watched and listened, more importantly, to the dialogue of the interview with Carol Greenspan and myself, and thank you, Carol, again, back in Columbia, Missouri, and here I am, Akiva, in Seattle. October 17th, 2015. I've found another portion of the May 1998 interview by Jewish Spectrum host Carol Greenspan with me. I was being interviewed at the KOPN-FM NPR affiliate station in Columbia, Missouri studio. And I don't know how long it's going to be, but I'm going to add it to the preceding portion I videoed, which was kind of visually choppy, but at least most of the audio was heard. What I'm heard talking about here, I've only listened for a few seconds, is conversion campaigns by evangelical fundamentalist Christians targeting Jews and the hundreds of millions of dollars they spend every year to do that. So without further ado, let's see, and I'm just going to hold the camera on a photograph of one of the drawings from the Under the Wing series, Rubinstein, the mime of the Warsaw Ghetto who was murdered at the Treblinka death extermination camp in Poland in the fall of 1942. Okay, here we go. It should start momentarily here.
By fundamentalist Christians to convert Jews. And the $300 million annually is spent. Can you imagine if this money was spent on hospitals or schools or education programs or something like that? $300 million a year is spent on the production of radio, TV shows, slick magazines, which is solely geared towards targeting Jews, especially young American Jews, teenagers, and so on. And my contention is, and my anger in response to this is that, especially in the light of the post-Holocaust time period that we live in, but at any time, Jews are entitled, just like any other people, to have their own religion and to have their own faith. Now, I can quote Elie Wiesel on this, not word for word, but I've read it, that for a person to say that one person's religion is superior to another and that the other's is inferior is hate. It's hateful. It's racist.
Promise Keepers, they're coming to Columbia.
Yes. And the Promise Keepers, like the Southern Baptist Convention, have placed at the forefront of their mission the conversion of Jews. Now it's outright racist. It's outright expresses hate and contempt. It strips me and my family and every Jew I know of their dignity as Jews, saying that we have to convert to Christianity, we have to accept Jesus, and we reject that. We're entitled, just like a Muslim or a Buddhist or someone of any other religion is entitled to worship their faith unobstructed, unharassed, unhindered from people telling them that your faith is inferior, ours is better. Well, that's rubbish.
You used the term final solution in describing this to me and then backed off a little bit from it later in a conversation we had a couple days ago.
Well, if let's say hypothetically, that the fundamentalist Christians who are out to make the whole world Christian, and especially the Jews are the top candidates of who must be converted according to Christian fundamentalism. If they succeeded in doing that, if they converted all the world's Jews, there wouldn't be any Jews left. And in that sense, they would have completed the final solution. The world would then be Judenrein, which was the World War II era German term for without Jews. When I was in Poland, I was in villages that had no Jews anymore. These towns are effectively made Judenrein. They're Jewless. There's no Jews. So while I back off from, I'm not going to say it's like being like Nazis, but it's certainly showing, it's very ironic. The Christians I encounter in Seattle who tell me that I and my family and every Jew on the planet must accept Jesus, they tell me they love me. Well, if they love me and if they love Jews so much, why do they seek to get rid of us through conversion?
A lovely woman came to the congregation Beth Shalom a couple of weeks ago and said to me, "Oh, I love to go to Jewish services because it's my history." And I answered, "And it's our present." And you've been listening to A.K.Segan, artist, philosopher, who kindly joined us at this bizarre hour, early hour of the morning. And he's going to be presenting at the university
over the next couple of days, slide presentations which teach the Holocaust through art.
Where, when?
At Ellis Auditorium, adjacent to Ellis Library. There would be room for people to attend the slide presentation I'll be giving on Tuesday morning at 9:45.
Tuesday morning at 9:45, Ellis Auditorium. We close with Laura Wexler's Bamacombe, and my friend and colleague, remarkable Lucille Salerno, will be coming up in just about 3 minutes here on KOPN. And thank you, Akiva. I know that it was very painful for you to get up at this incredible hour of the morning. In fact, I called him and woke him up to remind him, and he crawled out of bed and was here in about 7 minutes.
Here. Thank you very much.
The quote from Elie Wiesel, I will add it to the description. It was, if my memory serves, well, actually, it's in the book Harry James Cargus in Conversation with Elie Wiesel, published by Paulus Press in 1975. And he doesn't use the word hateful. He does specifically use the word racist. Actually, sorry, I'm getting articles and excerpts mixed up. It was actually in a article in the Sunday magazine of the Seattle Times, which was syndicated in other equivalent Sunday papers around the country in 1996, and I will get the quote for the description. Some nice music here. That was beautiful, whoever that was. I'll listen to the ending again and see if I can catch the name of the performer. Thank you. Rubinstein, by the way, was drawn from a photograph I had found in a old-style card catalog. This is pre-computer at the YIVO Institute and Library in New York in spring 1993. I jotted down the info from the card and gave it to the librarian there, and about an hour later they pulled out of a vault the original photograph, and I almost gasped when I saw it. I said, I've got to draw this person. There was no negative or anything. They just had the single photograph. I don't know who took it. In the photograph, he's standing on the street in the Warsaw Ghetto. There's buildings behind him and 3 or 4 men. There was like this pedicab, rickshaw type of thing, which is the only thing I included, like kind of to ground him to the pavement, along with a few gestural lines here, one by his left foot on viewer's right. And I ordered a print. I got it that summer of '93, did the drawing up at the University of Washington Burke Museum of Natural History in their ornithology lab, where I drew the wings from actual birds' wings. And in the photograph, he's standing there with this like an ear-to-ear grin, a beret, a Western-style shirt with snap pockets, a shiny belt, and kind of tapered like mime-like pants and shiny shoes. And as I've told many audiences over the years, where I've shown it in schools and elsewhere, I've had by then probably looked at hundreds of photographs of World War II in Europe and the Holocaust, and never seen anything like this. In Roman Polanski's movie The Pianist, there is a scene where, I can't remember the man's name, he was in hiding in this ghetto, actually he wasn't in the ghetto, he was hiding in a flat in an apartment on the so-called Aryan side, and the Warsaw Ghetto was being crushed during the time of the uprising, and he looks out and sees this character who's gesticulating like Rubinstein with his kind of arm out like that, but he looks like Janusz Korczak, the orphanage director who was murdered with the children from the biggest ghetto orphanage at the Treblinka death camp. And it's kind of just interesting melding that Polanski did of 2 actual people who were murdered by the Nazis, Rubinstein and Janusz Korczak. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.